I followed Henry down the creaking ladder and squinted around in the deep gloom below. The root cellar smelled strongly of damp earth, and beneath that, an unpleasant undertone of moldy potatoes. I shivered in the damp air and called out, Henry, where'd you go?" I waited for a few moments, listening for his footsteps, and hearing nothing but the low static roar of silence. I fished my phone out of my pocket and clicked on the flashlight, revealing a few dusty shelf units and a small pile of crumbling bricks in the corner. Henry was gone. I checked the only possible hiding spot, a space beneath the stairs that led up to the double doors from outside. But Henry was nowhere to be seen. I half-heartedly called out his name again, but it appeared Henry had taken a sidestep somewhere. I was alone. I grumbled, "Thanks, Henry," and shuffled over to click on the only light in the root cellar. A naked bulb jutted out of a fixture that had only been nailed to a floor joust. I pulled the dangling length of twine that served as a switch, turned around, and took a sharp breath. Henry and my dad appeared in the flickering light, both of them leaning into a rectangular hole in the wall on the far side of the room. The cobwebs on the ceiling were gone, and abandoned shelving units were filled with mason jars full of preserves. It was January of 1981. And I was standing on the sidelines of the past. I jumped back and uttered a shrill, "Holy fuck!" But neither one of them seemed to notice. I was observing a memory. But this time, it wasn't one of my own. This memory belonged to Henry. The hole in the wall was roughly 6 feet long and 2 feet high. The dirt they'd excavated was piled up nearby in a large mound, along with a stack of bricks they'd painstakingly removed with a hammer drill, a mallet, and a chisel. There was a bag of mortar mix sitting on the floor, along with a bucket, a trowel, and a few old milk jugs filled with water. Henry had brought down the radio from the kitchen and set it on a corner. It was softly warbling, a Dolly Parton tune in between brief flickers of interference. It looked shiny and new in the dull gleam of the naked light bulb. The body was lying beside the pile of dirt, wrapped tightly in a canvas tarp and bound with a length of rope. I stared at it with an uncomfortable mixture of pity and morbid fascination. I was looking at a dreadful family heirloom. The long-ago sins of a father that would now be visited upon his son. "It should be deep enough," Henry panted, and he pulled himself out of the hole with a grimace. He dropped his shovel spade and grabbed his lower back with both hands. "Christ, my poor back. Okay, grab the other end. Help me get it in there." They wrestled their sagging burden into the hole and pushed it back as far as it would go. Henry grunted. "Almost done. Fill it in, fix up the wall, and get the hell out of this house." Henry was interrupted by a long, muffled groan, and his words dried up instantly. He shared a look of shocked dismay with my dad and backed away from the hole. In a strangled whisper, Henry asked, "What the hell was that?" There was a burst of rustling inside the hole, accompanied by equally frantic whimpering. A man's voice gurgled, "Don't do this. I have a wife and kids. Please don't." Henry backed away from the hole with an expression of sheer horror on his face. He pointed at my dad with a shaking finger and croaked, "Christ almighty, Wally! We almost buried him alive!" Dad uttered a ferocious sting of curses and spat, "I thought he was dead! Fuck!" Straining to be audible through his canvas shroud, the dying man pleaded, "I won't tell nobody. Just let me go and I won't. For God's sake, please. I got a wife and kids. I love them. I can't leave them alone in this world." Dad scowled at Henry, ignoring his victim's pleas, and he growled, "I ain't doing this kind of time, Henry. Not for this short-peckered son of a whore." He stabbed his spade into the pile of earth and started flinging dirt onto the makeshift tomb. Henry barked, "Stop it!" and lunged to grab his arm. Dad twisted free and pushed Henry back with the handle of the spade, shoving it into his gut with both hands and sending him sprawling onto the floor. He growled down at Henry and said, "It's too late to stop. It's way too late." His breath was raggedly heaving in and out of his chest, and tears were starting to leak down the weathered planes of his cheeks. "What are you gonna do?" he demanded. "Bury the poor bastard alive?" Dad offered Henry the spade and gestured at the hole in the wall. "Tell you what, Henry. Go ahead, give him a good whack or two in the head. I don't know how to do the trick. Do it right now. Stand the hell back and shut the fuck up. Alive or dead, this motherfucker's getting buried." There was an endless moment of oppressive silence. Time stood still as my father and uncle stared at each other, both of them streaked with dirt, sweat beneath the wavering glare of the naked light bulb above their heads. I could see in Dad's face that he would do what he had to do in order to avoid getting arrested. And to hell with the consequences. All bets were off. And Henry knew it. The dead quiet between them was suddenly interrupted by the disembodied voice in the wall, trembling and wavering in anguish. The dying man shrilled at them. "Who do you love, you rotten sons of bitches? I'll come for them, you hear me? I'll claw my way out of here, and I'll drag you all to hell!" Henry cringed away from the captive's fury, but Dad shoved his arm into the hole and hauled the screeching, wriggling bundle onto the floor with one furious heave. He snarled, "I'll be waiting for you, cocksucker!" And he proceeded to batter the helpless rival's skull into a pulp with the business end of the spade. I screamed, "Dad, no!" But this was only a memory. A fleeting figment of the past. And there was nothing that I could do to stop him. Henry turned away and put his face in his hands. When it was over, one end of the dead man's canvas cocoon was completely soaked through with blood. It was also notably flatter than it had been before the assault. "Don't think you can turn me in and come out of this clean, Henry," Dad grimaced, "because you won't. And that's a fact. Instead, think about your wife. Think about Mom, her husband, our aunts and uncles, and all the rest of our kin, and then you tell me something, boy. Is this dirty sack of dog shit worth more than them? Is it worth more than your own goddamn life?" Henry turned to me, his expression somber, and he said, "Well, kiddo, I thought about it, and I decided it wasn't worth more than any of them. Not at that point." Just like that, the body was gone. The mason jars full of preserves were gone, and I was standing back in my own when and where. The tools, however, they were still there, along with the mortar mix and all the accessories. I was going to need them. Henry popped open his old craftsman toolbox and started pawing through the jumble of tools inside. He said, "I don't know what to tell you, kid. What's done is done. Come down to two options. I can call the cops, ruin everyone's life, or I could help bury the body and pretend it never happened. Well, that's what I did. Think whatever you want. Doing the right thing can be pretty fucking hard. Doing the wrong thing's usually a lot easier." My nerves were still jittering from the brutal intensity of the scene that I just witnessed. I could only shake my head and say, "My God, Henry. What a fucking mess." Henry gave me a sour look and said, "Told you, didn't I? Wally wasn't right in the head. After everything he'd seen and done in the war and all the horrible shit we went through when we were kids, well, it broke him. He was a broken soul." Henry found the bit he was looking for and secured it into the chuck of his hammer drill. He gave it an experimental whirl with a squeeze of the trigger and said, "You gotta drill a bunch of holes in the mortar. chisel the bricks out pretty easy after that, and try not to break too many in the process. You got a few extras over there, not a whole lot of them. Henry handed over the drill and nodded at the wall. Go do it, kid. I can't help you with this part. I examined the wall and realized I could still make out a distinct rectangle where they'd removed the bricks all those years ago, even though 4 decades had passed since that night. The mortar in this area was slightly less dingy than the rest of the wall, and it looks like a very rushed and sloppy job had been done here with the bricklaying work. Not by a professional, but 2 desperate men, both of them staring damnation in the eye as they sealed away a murder victim in the middle of the night. I traced the outline with my finger and said, "Hey, I've got a question for you, Henry. Upstairs in the kitchen, didn't you say people can see the future in their dreams? Because Michelle had a really bad nightmare involving me and this root cellar." Henry gave me a guarded look and shrugged. "Well, they can," he agreed in a carefully neutral tone. "I wouldn't worry too much about it if I were you. They're still mostly in the physical world. They're here and now. I got a few toes dangling in the water, if you understand what I mean. What's buried behind those bricks is long gone somewhere else. There's nothing in there but a dried-out husk and maybe a little residue of the past. Even if his spirit is still lingering around, I don't think it could hurt you. Not in the physical world." I looked him in the eye and said, "Are you sure about that, Henry? Are you really? Because you don't seem very sure about that to me." Henry gave me the side eye and opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came out. He clenched at his throat with an alarmed expression and started making a horrible gagging sound. I said, Hey, what's going on?" I reached out and put my hand on his shoulder, but Henry abruptly winked out of existence with a slight breeze and a faint popping sound. I looked around wildly and called out, "Henry? Hey, are you okay, man? Uncle Henry!" There was no answer. I was alone in the root cellar once again. But that wasn't true, was it? I wasn't really alone. I had company waiting for me. On the other side of that wall. I became aware that my phone was ringing in my pocket. It stopped ringing as I was fishing it out, and I observed with dismay that I had missed a number of calls from Michelle, as well as a multitude of texts. She was undoubtedly freaking the fuck out, and she wasn't exactly unjustified to do so either. I breathed, "Fuck me," and I called her back. "Hi, babe. Hey, sorry that Michelle hollered. "Why wouldn't you answer the phone, damn it? Where were you?" I stammered. "I'm really sorry, okay? I accidentally left my phone up on the 2nd floor, so I didn't hear it ringing. Everything's all good over here, I promise. What's going on with you? Is everything okay?" There was a hesitation on the other end of the line. She cleared her throat and said, "The hospital called. Henry was starting to have some kind of respiratory difficulties. I'm not sure what the problem was, but they said they're getting ready to put him on a respirator." I closed my eyes and groaned. Oh, fuck. Shit. Okay, thanks for letting me know. I'm sorry I didn't answer the phone. I'll make sure it's in my pocket from now on." There was another hesitation, and then Michelle asked, "Are you sure everything's okay? You sound really weird when you answer the phone. What's going on?" Before I could respond, the radio in the kitchen popped on and started blasting away at the top volume. I uttered a small shriek and jumped high enough to bang the crown of my skull on one of those exposed floor joists overhead. I saw a bright flash of light go off somewhere behind my eyeballs, and my phone tumbled from my hand as I crumpled to the floor. I sputtered out some random permutations of the word fuck and crawled over to my phone. I could faintly hear Michelle demanding to know what was going on. I hollered, "Look, I gotta go, okay? We'll talk later. Bye." I shoved the phone into my pocket and peered up the ladder. All I could see was a square section of yellowing ceiling tiles. The Woolies were on the radio, and Storm Rice was hollering, "Who do you love?" over a cacophony of pounding drums. I gathered all the tattered courage I could muster and climbed the ladder. I had no idea what was about to happen, but I had a feeling it was going to be very bad. The first thing I saw when my head poked up above floor level was a pair of clunky-looking orthopedic shoes. They were attached to a pair of swollen ankles that bulged like overstuffed sausages within the confines of some dingy compression socks. It was my Aunt Eustace. She's been dead for almost 2 years, but there she was, sitting down for a cup of tea with the radio blasting away on the table beside her. She smiled at me and turned on the volume and said, "I'm sorry, dear, but I wanted to get your attention. I don't like going down there. Come on up, have some tea. There's something I want to tell you." I cautiously sat down across from her and took a careful sip from the steaming mug in front of me. It was Earl Grey with 2 sugars and a healthy splash of evaporated milk. The Aunt Eustace special. I set my cup back into the saucer and stammered, I don't know what to say. It's good to see you. I've missed you a lot since you've been gone. No, I had a million questions, but she shushed me with a raised finger and said, "I'm here to make a confession. I knew about the body buried in the cellar. I knew all that time, and I never said a word to anyone." I was startled enough to almost choke on my tea. I gasped at her. "You knew about that, and you kept it a secret?" My aunt nodded solemnly and patted the back of my hand. Whether she was a ghost, an illusion, or just an echo of the past, her touch was real. "When Henry got off the phone that night," she continued, "I took one look at him and I just knew it was something with your dad. I figured he got himself arrested for drunk driving and needed Henry to come get him. I mean, why the heck would Jonathan be out in his tractor that late in a cold winter night? Come on." I murmured, "Henry wants to protect everyone around him. He's always trying to shield other people from harm." "Maybe so. But he's a piss-poor liar." Anyway, he didn't get into bed until almost 5 in the morning. The next day, I went down there and got a jar of beets for supper, and I saw the work he'd done to the wall. I thought, why the heck did he do that? I went back up the ladder with my beets, and I heard him talking on the radio about some guy who went missing the night before. Right away, I knew what happened. I was sick to my stomach over it, but I honestly didn't know what to do, so I didn't do anything at all. I just pretended I didn't know what was down there, and I carried on as usual. I rubbed my temples and said, I guess I should be surprised, but at this point, I'm not sure if I can be surprised anymore. So that was it. You just forgot about it, and life went on? Eustace gave me a frown of disapproval and said, "Come on now, that's a bit of a stretch, isn't it? I never forgot. I just decided it was best left unsaid. What was I supposed to do? Call the police? Turn everyone in? Life isn't that simple, my boy. But actions do have consequences, don't they?" She sipped at her tea and nodded at me, her eyes full of sorrow. All those years. I went down there, I ignored the patch of brickwork on the wall. I'd fetch whatever I needed and just pretend I didn't see the damn thing. But I could always feel it, you know? I could always feel, I don't know, a presence, I suppose. And it was angry. Her words faltered. I reached across the table to grip her hand and prompted, "What happened?" "I went down to the cellar one day to give the shelves a dusting, and while I was working away down there in the gloom, I heard something. A noise behind the wall." Eustace's eyes went dark. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength and wiped away a trickle of tears. Quietly, she said, It was scratching. Something was scratching at the bricks on the other side." I put my ear up against the wall and I listened, and oh my word, I was so scared. I told myself it was just a rat. But I knew that wasn't true. And then it spoke to me. Eustace's lips pressed together in a trembling line. She gripped my hand even harder and leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Its voice crackled like dead leaves," she shuddered. "It said, 'I've been waiting a long time.'" And I started to scream. I flew up the ladder as fast as I could, but my foot slipped on the top rung. I fell. I had a massive stroke when I hit the ground, and the last sound I heard was its laughter, and then I was gone. I stared at my aunt in horror, and she stared back with tears running down her face. She said, "I was stupid to go down there in the first place. This house, it's full of restless spirits, angry spirits. And it was wrong for me to help them cover up the horrible thing they did to that man. I deserve what happened to me. I was a stupid old woman." I shook my head vigorously and exclaimed, "No, don't say that. That's not true. None of this was your fault." "Just a stupid old bitch," she sobbed. My words died on my lips. Eustace smiled through her tears and nodded. "Stupid and unworthy of life, just like the rest of you. Cowards. Murderers. We all deserve to die." Her thin, delicate fingers were crushing my hand like a vice. I tried to pull away, and she clamped down even harder. Grinding my knuckles together, I whimpered, "Aunt Eustace, you're hurting me." Her smile curled into an ugly sneer, and she crooned, "Better ask yourself something. Who do you love?" I shoved my chair back with my legs, tried to yank my hand away, but I couldn't break free from her grasp. Aunt Eustace started collapsing into herself in a rapid time-lapse of natural mummification. The hand that held me pinioned to the table shriveled into a wizened claw, and her eyeballs withered away into non-existence, disappearing inside the dark tunnels of her eye sockets. I gawked at this gruesome spectacle with my tongue pasted to the roof of my mouth, and then I started to scream. The left side of the grisly phantom's head suddenly dented beneath a blow from an invisible weapon. Spot! Splut! A second dent appeared, then several more in rapid succession, creating a landscape of jagged ridges and spidery fracture lines. The final blow caved in the skull entirely, leaving behind a horrific concavity in its wake. The dreadful apparition threw back its head and howled. "Won't be long before the old bastard's cold in the ground beside me, boy. Not long now." The movement of its jaw triggered a catastrophic collapse on the ruined side of its head. Wispy flakes of dry skin floated into the air as the bone beneath crumbled into fragments. They tumbled down and skittered across the smooth surface of the tabletop, leaving behind a gaping crater in their wake. It shrieked a peal of lunatic laughter and bellowed, "He'll be cold in the ground just like me. Cold and dead. Dead, dead, dead." I jumped out of my chair and pulled against its grip with all my might, still screaming at the top of my lungs. I abruptly found myself pinwheeling my arms for balance as I helplessly tumbled backwards. The awful apparition had winked out of existence. It was real enough to bruise my hand 1 second, and then it was gone the next. I stepped into thin air and fell through the open trap door, plummeting 7 feet to the floor of the root cellar. I landed on the hard-packed dirt floor, flat on my back. Thump! And I laid there for a while, curled up on my side as I struggled to catch my breath from the impact. I also managed to bang my shin on the ladder on the way down. It hurt like a mad bastard. I clutched at it with both hands and rocked back and forth on the floor. Piece of shit fucking ghosts. Kiss my ass. Without warning, there was suddenly a figure leaning over me with its hand out. I shrieked away from it, my hands flailing to ward it off, and it exclaimed, "Jesus Christ! The hell happened to you?" I almost wept in relief when I realized it was Henry. I sat up straight and wheezed. "You said it couldn't hurt me, Henry. Bullshit. Some crazy shit just happened, and it fucking hurt a lot." "I said it couldn't hurt you in the physical world," Henry corrected. "When you slip in between, maybe that's a different story." "Hey, don't look at me like that. I'm a farmer, not an expert in the great beyond. Call one of those psychic hotlines if you want a goddamn expert." Henry helped me to my feet and examined the top of my head. He said, "You're bleeding, kiddo. You whack your noggin off something?" I touched the sore spot on my skull and winced. My fingers came away tacky with dried blood. I could feel smears of it hardening in my hair and on my forehead. "Yeah, I sure did," I sighed. "Okay, so I get this thing out of the wall, then what? What do I do with it?" "You remember when you cut up that birch tree last summer?" "I hung around after you took the tractor back to the barn and piled up a big mound of branches. Should be good and dry by now. You take the body out there and burn it. Lots of dead wood lying around if you need more. Burn it till there's nothing left. And dump the ashes in the creek. It's the only way to be sure." I ground my palms against my weary eyes and asked, "Is this the right thing to do, Henry? I mean, be honest. Is it?" Henry considered my question, frowning to himself as he reasoned out his answer. "No," he said. No, I don't think so. Right thing to do would be to call the police, but I'm not asking you to do the right thing here, kiddo. Man we buried behind these bricks, shit. He's many years gone. Nothing we can do that would bring him back. The memories our family created in this house, the love and the light that we'd given and received on this land for so many years. Well, if you call the cops, all that'll be gone. There'll be nothing left but sorrow. So it comes down to one of two choices, kid. You do the right thing, harm our future, or you can do the wrong thing, preserve our past. What's it gonna be? That is a hell of a choice, Henry, I croaked. Why did you put me in this position? Henry gave me a pitying look. He crossed his arms and said, People face impossible choices every day. We only have the fear of our souls and the hope in our hearts to guide us in the right decision. Life's rarely simple. It's never easy. That's why it's precious, kiddo. When you're alive, every second of every day is a drop of gold sliding through your fingers. Then your hand, and then it's gone. No matter how hard you try, you can't hold on to it, not a single moment in time. I rubbed my temples and closed my eyes. My head hurt like a bastard. My poor shin was throbbing away something awful. I nodded at Henry, my eyes still closed, and I said, I'll take him out of there, and I'll burn him, Henry. I'll do it for the same reason you buried him, because it's easier than the alternative. I opened my eyes and discovered myself standing in the past once again. A silent observer looking on from the outskirts of reality. At this point, the deed had been done, and they were clearing up the tools in silence. There was a rectangular patch of freshly mortared bricks on the wall, and behind that, the newly interred corpse of a murder victim. Dad stopped what he was doing to take a few nips from his flask. He turned to Henry, who appeared to be pointedly ignoring him, and he said, "It's probably best if we never talk about this again, if you know what I—" "Shut up," Henry grunted. His face was ashen and exhausted beneath a layer of grime. He looked diminished. "Just shut the hell up." Henry's eyes strayed over Dad's shoulder, and they had widened in surprise. I looked up and saw the trapdoor was being held open a few inches, just wide enough to allow a small face to peer down on what was going on below. Henry shook his head almost imperceptibly, his gaze glowering in unspoken command, and the door immediately eased shut. Dad looked behind him and said, "Just staring at him." Henry waved him off, a dismissive gesture that was full of contempt, and he turned away from him. "Never mind," he muttered. "Look, I want you to get the hell out of this house and don't come back for a good long while. When your boy wants to come out for a visit, I'll drive him over there and fetch him myself. I don't think you need to be coming around here no more." My father shook a finger at him and said, "You can't tell me I ain't welcome here. This farm don't belong to you. It belongs to Ma." Uncle Henry pulled himself up straight and tall. He walked up to my father until they were almost nose to nose, and he said, "I just saved you from life in prison. I'll tell you whatever the fuck I want, and while I'm at it, I'll tell you something else. Ma is ashamed of what you've become. You shame her, Wally. Now turn yourself around, climb up that fucking ladder, and get the hell out of this house." Dad flinched back from the venom in Henry's voice, his lower lip trembling. He opened his mouth to speak, thought the better of it, and reluctantly did as he was told. As he disappeared up into the kitchen, Henry turned to me and said, "I don't know how much you saw that night, kiddo, but I'm sorry it happened. I never wanted that." My throat suddenly felt constricted. I bit my lip to keep it from trembling and looked down at my feet. I woke up and I thought I heard voices in the cellar. I could see lights shining through the cracks around the trapdoor, so I opened it up a few inches to take a look. I saw Dad hit the tarp with the shovel. I didn't understand what was happening, but it scared me. I think I knew what was going on deep down, but it was too much for a kid that age to process. I watched you bury the tarp in the wall. I had a feeling it was supposed to be a secret. When you looked up at me, I thought I was going to be in big trouble for sure. Henry was quiet for a while, and then he muttered, "Oh, well, shit. I'm sorry that happened, kid. I really am." I could remember it now. Being huddled on my side on the cold kitchen floor, watching in the dark as my arm trembled against the weight of the door, I laid there on the cold linoleum and I spied on him until Henry happened to look up and made eye contact, at which point I dropped the door as softly as I could and scampered back to the couch. Less than a minute later, Dad blundered past and let himself out the front door. I pretended to sleep for a while, petrified that I was in the deepest shit possible for spying on their secret errand. At some point, my pretend sleep turned into the real thing, and when I woke up the next morning, I decided that it had all been just a dream. It was easier that way. I could feel Henry watching me. I looked up and tried to smile. It didn't work, but I could see that Henry appreciated the effort. I thought I was watching your memories, Henry, but they were actually my own. But that doesn't explain everything else that happened tonight. Those weren't memories. They were something else entirely. Henry gave me a grim look. He said, "No, those weren't memories. They were restless spirits. Open this wall, help them find some peace. Help us all find some rest. Just remember something, kiddo. The ghosts that haunt houses and castles, they may be scary to look at. They're not dangerous. They're forever stuck in between. You should pity for them. The dangerous ghosts are the ones that haunt your conscience. Yeah. They're the restless spirits of our own devising. They'll destroy you if they can." Henry pointed at the wall and said, "Well, that's all I got, kiddo. The rest is up to you. It's your story now." I reached out to him with an unsteady hand and whispered, "Can you stay and help me? I'm really fucking scared, Henry. I can't do this alone." Henry's lips twitched in a sad smile, and he shook his head. "I'm lying in a bed 40 miles away with a tube shoved down my throat. I might die tonight, or next week. Maybe I'll live to see my 100th birthday. I don't know. I don't have any idea when it'll happen, but it will happen. I won't be here forever. You'll have to accept that." Henry took my hand in his strong, calloused grip, gave it a squeeze. Then he was gone. This time he wouldn't be coming back. For the rest of this harrowing journey, it'd just be me. Me, a skeleton wrapped in a rotting tarp, and my own restless spirits. I got 10 minutes into the painstaking process of drilling into the mortar before I realized I didn't have to be careful with the bricks. I could simply go out and buy some new ones. Henry wouldn't have approved, but Henry wasn't there. I was on my own. I grabbed the club hammer out of Henry's toolbox and went to work. 20 minutes later, there was a pile of earth and rubble on the floor, and I was reaching into the hole to brush dirt away from the rotting tarp. It was riddled with small holes made by burrowing scavengers, and it was stiff from the excretion of the decaying process. I gingerly hauled the tarp out of the hole, grimacing at the smell, and I marveled at how light it was. No matter who we were in life, we all end up as a bag of bones. Buried and forgotten. I made a quick mental checklist of what to do next. I would go out to the barn, pull out Henry's trailer, and hook it up to the ball hitch on the ATV. While the ATV was warming up, I would scare up a can of gasoline and maybe some old rags to make a torch. My train of thought was interrupted by a sudden burst of activity at my feet. I looked down and gasped. Oh, holy fuck. The body was moving around inside the tarp. A rusty blade punched through the canvas, and I staggered backwards, a jagged shriek ripping out of my throat. The blade started sawing a long rip down the length of the tarp. I ran for the ladder, screaming at the top of my lungs every step of the way. I jumped onto the first rung, and a face appeared above me. A small face with wide, terrified eyes. It was me. As a child. Confused and frightened. frightened to the point of tears. "I'll get in trouble," the boy sniffed, and he slammed the door shut on my screams. I pounded on the splintery wood and screeched out, "You didn't do anything wrong! Open up!" "Left me to die," a familiar voice said behind me. My heart dropped into my stomach. It was my father who was crawling out of that foul canvas coffin, a grinning scarecrow in a discount funeral suit. He lurched to his feet and pointed at me with his knife, one hand closed and the other winking open, just enough to show a thin crescent of white. It said, "I never wanted you, boy," and started shuffling forward, the knife still leveling at my heart. "I used to daydream about grabbing you by the heel and bashing your head against the wall. I should have done it when I had the chance." "If you never wanted me, why would you care if I wasn't there when you died?" My question stopped him in his tracks. I nodded and wiped away my tears with my sleeve. "Yeah, you don't have an answer for that, do you? You died alone, and it's not my fault because that's what you wanted." I picked up the shovel, and I advanced on him. I was still crying. But now I was angry too. I was fucking furious. "Even if I was there to call an ambulance," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Even so, there's no guarantee that they could have saved you. Okay? It wasn't my fault. You're gone. You're gone, you mean old bastard, and you know what? I don't miss you." The knife fell from the apparition's fingers. He shrank away from me, his hand held out in supplication. He moaned, "You ain't worth shit, boy. You were never worth a shit." "Yeah, maybe not," I said. "But I'm alive, motherfucker. I'm alive, and there's love in my heart. I love my wife, and I love Uncle Henry, and do you want to know something else, you rotten son of a bitch? I love myself, too." Dad dropped to his hands and knees in the dirt. He craned his neck to look up at me and he panted, "You're no son of mine." I nodded in agreement, and I raised the shovel. "I never was," I said. And I swung it as hard as I could. Dad flicked out like a wavering candle flame and the shovel whistled through an empty space. It bounced off the floor, kicking up a spray of dirt and sending an unpleasant shiver up both of my arms. I dropped the shovel and I cried out, "Fuck you! Fuck me!" Ugh. My phone started ringing. It was Michelle. I fumbled it out of my pocket with numb, throbbing hands and sniffled. "Hey, honey. I just want you to know that I fucking love you. I really, really do." She sputtered. "What the hell happened over there? I was one unanswered call away from dialing 911. Are you okay?" I smiled through tears, and I said, "Better than okay. I'm pretty fucking fantastic." I started to laugh, and the fact that I couldn't explain why I was laughing, it made me laugh even harder. I laughed, and I sniffled, and I assured her that I was fine, that the house was fine, and all things under the sun were just fine and dandy. The ghosts were no longer restless. And everything would be fine. I woke up on the couch late the next morning, blinking around in the living room with a sour stomach and A decent pounder of a headache. My clothes had reeked like a funeral pyre, and I squinted at the sunshine streaming through the windows, and I decided I was done with drinking. It'd be hard, but as Henry had said that night before, life is rarely simple. It's never easy. Sobriety was going to be a bit of a drag, but had to be better than waking up and feeling like that all the time. Michelle called while I was cleaning up the mess from the night before, pushing a mop with one hand while I sipped at coffee with the other. She said, "I called in sick today. They're mad, but whatever. I don't care. Could hardly sleep a wink last night. Actually glad I stayed home. The hospital just called with good news. Henry's doing a lot better today. He's still sedated, but they said that we can come see him." I dropped the mop on the floor. I thrust my clenched fists into the air and hollered, "Yes! Oh, that's great news. I'm just finishing up a few things right now, but I'll meet you at the hospital around 2 o'clock. Michelle said, "Sure, of course. Sounds good." After a pause, she added, "I was worried about you. I think there's some details you're not telling me, and I'm dying to know what they are, but I'll leave it alone for now. Maybe you can fill me in on what happened someday." I caught a glimpse at my reflection in the big mirror beside the front hall closet. Then I smiled grimly at the smears of dried blood on my forehead. I said, "Someday. But definitely not today." "Okay. See you at 2, babe. Love you." I hustled through the rest of the cleanup, then jumped in the shower and washed away all the blood and grime. I had a pretty good goose egg on the top of my head. My hair seemed to cover it up well enough. It's not as thick as it used to be, but I'm not bald just yet. Still a few good years left in me, and I intended to live them to the fullest. I almost walked out the door before I remembered the garbage needed to be out for Monday morning pickup. I popped open the lid and saw Henry's notebook lying at the top of the bag, still damp from being soaked in a mixture of black coffee and booze. I looked at the words Henry had scrawled on the front cover, and realized they were instructions for the disposal of the notebook. Before I left for the hospital, I took it out to the burn barrel and did as Henry had requested. I tore the book into pieces, and I burned it into a fine dusting of ashes. Henry was unconscious, drugged into dreamland so that he wouldn't fight against the tube in his throat. He looked painfully thin and ill, but he was alive, and that was all that mattered. We stood by his bedside for a while, thinking our thoughts and holding hands in silence. "He'll make it," Michelle murmured. "Henry's larger than life, and twice as loud. He'll probably outlive us all." She squeezed my hand, and I winced. She held it up for examination and exclaimed, "The hell happened? These bruises are nasty. Kind of shaped like fingers." "Oh, yeah, that's a long story," I said. I gently pulled my hand free from her inquisitive probing. "It's fine. I mean, it hurts a little, but it's fine. Do you mind if I have a minute alone with Henry? I know he can't hear me, but I got a few things I'd like to say," and I trailed off, looking at her expectantly. And Michelle gave me a solemn nod. "I'll go get something from the vending machine down the hall. I could use a drink. Do you want anything?" I shook my head. Michelle said, "Okay. See you in a bit," and gave me a quick hug before she left the room. When she was gone, I looked down at Henry and said, I don't think you can hear me, Henry. I mean, maybe you can. I don't know. I just want you to know that it's done. I mean, I'll have to come back later with some bricks, and I have to fix that wall, but I mean, I still got lots of time to do that. Farm isn't going up for sale tomorrow. Henry made no indications that he could hear anything I was saying, but I plowed on regardless. Hey, I also wanted to thank you for everything that you've done for me over the years. You always get all angry and embarrassed when I tell you that, but you need to understand how much it means to me. I'm glad you were there last night, even if it was only in my imagination. I needed your voice, and I needed your presence. I needed your strength. You have to do something for me, okay? You've got to come back to us, Henry, and stay a little while longer. Don't leave us behind. Not just yet. There's still so much that needs to be done. I held my breath and I watched his face, hoping for a twitch of the lips or a flutter of the eyelids, some indication that he could hear me. Nothing happened. Henry was deep under the surface, wandering in between this world and the next, rudderless and alone. Come on, Henry, I breathed. Give me something, man. Give me a sign. I was just about to give up when I saw movement from the corner of my eye. It was his hand. It started to twitch and it clenched into a loose fist. I smiled and gripped his fist in both hands. That's it, Henry. Just a sign. That's all His fist relaxed. And I felt something soft and granular pour into my cupped hands. It's a handful of dirt. And I'll bet $1 million I know where it came from. It smelled like damp basement. And beneath that, a faint but pervasive odor of moldy potatoes. I said, "Thank you, Henry." And I flushed the dirt down the toilet. I carefully brushed the rest of it off the bedsheets, and then Michelle was walking back into the room with a bottle of Diet Sprite and a magazine. "I stole it from the waiting room," she explained. "I wanted something to read if we're going to be here for a while." I took her arm and said, "Nah, I don't think that's necessary. I already said my piece. Let's go. I'm tired. I feel like shit. We'll come back tomorrow." Michelle quickly lost me in traffic on the way home. I was content to put the car on autopilot and putt along in the slow lane. I had a lot to think about. By the time I got home, Michelle was putting the finishing touches on a couple of mugs of hot chocolate. We took them out to the balcony and watched the sun sink beneath the horizon. "So, you really fucking love me, do you?" Michelle smirked. And I gave her an embarrassed grin. "Yeah, I do," I agreed. "I really fucking love you. I love life." She leaned against me and said, "I'm sorry about the farm. I know you wanted to live there someday. It's important to you, that place." I shrugged and I said, "Fuck it. There'll be another farm. I'll make new memories there. Good ones. Start fresh." Michelle gave me a kiss and said, "Well, I'm glad on both counts. I fucking love you too, big weirdo. Come on, let's go inside. I'm cold." We retreated back into the warmth of our cozy apartment. Outside the sliding glass door, darkness fell over a world that isn't always as it seems. A world where reality is subjective, and tall tales can sometimes come true. In time, Henry would get well enough to leave the hospital, and he would receive an unexpected visitor from the distant past. A very unwelcome visitor. with a tale of their own to tell. But that is a story for another time. Until then, from Henry and I to all of you, please take care of yourselves. And if you ever find yourself in a tight spot, remember to ask yourself something. Who do you love? The answer might save your life someday. For those of you guys that like getting cozy while listening to stories, I'm going to let you know about Etsy.com/shop/ivorymonocletea. That's my wife's tea shop. She sells hand-blended teas. There's creepypasta-based teas if you want to get one that's a flavor that you like, or there's Mr. Creepypasta tea, which happens to be a tea that I drink fairly often. Some other ones I really suggest, the Gashel Greens, which is also one that I drink, and the Hibiscus, which has helped me out a lot with my high blood pressure. If you guys also like if you want to see like the Hibiscus tea, I think it's also called the Jeff the Killer tea. So, goddamn, Jeff is constantly in my life and there's no escaping him. Once again, that's Etsy.com/shop/ivorymonocletea. A big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Jakob Fenske, Stephanie Butler, Jordan Humble, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Emma, Brenna, LaQueda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Dante, Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, Mephistopheles, CursepoxPrimarch, Bastion Beefcake, M, Jesus Cornejo, Yarghoul, Clownible, Amber Clark, Jay Kearns, Dakota Lane Whetstone, Himbo Jerry, Crusader Chocobo, Adamarius, Estabine, Nate Cull, Our Minsect Time, Xylobones, Angelus, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Lebeda Galvin, That Creepy Chick, Red Shadow Cat, Turtleman, Carolinian, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Ika Limchalk, Dirty Diver 030, Matt Bach, Voice of Sand, Paikamel, Melted Lake, Tali Sue, William King, Darth Miver, Sashi Suzaku, Coconut 509, Stricket, Freddy Krueger, Lisa Cottrell, Hades Nephew, Acid System, Mog, Kiwi the Sloth, Fester's Lampshade, Nico Kyle, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. To all of you guys, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for being a huge support to me. Thank you to everybody who's in the description down below, and thank you to everyone who can even support $1 just on Patreon to help keep the content coming.